First off, everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I think you guys are probably my most favorite industry podcast out there because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Creative Risk, where we are talking with digital creator and theater critic and theater influencer, MickeyJoTheatre. I've been trying to get Mickey Joe on for a minute now. I love his content. I just think he's so smart and so funny, and we're born in the same city. So Mickey Joe's YouTube channel, MickeyJoTheatre, is the largest worldwide in terms of dedicated theater criticism, where he also shares features, news, and interviews, as well as lifestyle content for over 75,000 subscribers. His reviews and features have also been published by What's on Stage, Broadway World UK, Musicals Magazine, and londontheatre.co.uk. He now hosts a regular live chat show in London, profiling a diverse lineup of rising star performers, creatives, and composers. And we get into his discovery of online theater criticism, the growing of an audience, and all that it comes along with that on the pathway to building a full-time influencer content creator career. It's a great conversation. I think he's so smart, and I think it's a really interesting look at the future of the theater, as well as certainly theater criticism. It's a good second episode in comparison to our one with Peter Marks of the Washington Post theater critic from some time ago. Enjoy. So does your fiance, who's I loved his suit, does he work alongside you in a lot of your content efforts, or just supports you?
Yes and no. It's sort of shifting because I met him. I mean, he, a long time back in the day, used to be sort of in the first generation of theatre influencers before that's what we really called them, back in the dawn of like Todaytics. We're talking 10 plus years ago. And then he started working in theatre PR over here. And it's in that capacity that I kind of got to know him. But now he makes content by himself and then also participates a little bit in what I do as well. There's a little bit of crossover, but it's sort of all shifting. But everything we do is work. It feels like a home office where we're some kind of official business, even though we're doing separate things, and we'll shout down the hallway like, this is like Fiddler Cast has been announced, or like nominations are coming out, and it'll be a big moment.
I saw that Fiddler won, which my friend Raphael Papo, who he was nominated for supporting actor. He's not an actor.
Yeah, because he was the fiddler.
That's right. He was, and I met him. We went to the same school. He came out here to go to school in North Carolina, so we were connected. Super interesting artist, and knows really nothing about this world. Had told me about this production because Adam went and did it, of course. And he, I'll never forget. He texted me and he was like, "I've just been nominated for an Olivier Award. I don't even know what this means, or what do I, what all this is." You saw it though. You loved the show, right?
Yeah, it was a lovely production, and in the age of everything having some kind of a concept or being this very completely traditional version of a show whenever it gets revived, it managed to find a lovely middle ground where it wasn't reinventing it, it wasn't immersive Fiddler, it wasn't like contemporary Fiddler, it wasn't doing something obviously groundbreaking, but directed with such a sense of urgency and such a contemporary spirit while still looking traditional. I mean, we'd had a wonderful production that Trevor Nunn had directed just before the pandemic, and so there was sort of a lot of question marks around, do we need another really great Fiddler? But it was a brilliant production. It was Jordan Fine directing, who was the associate here on the Cabaret revival, and he's doing Into the Woods later this year, which is going to be very exciting, I think.
Well, Fiddler's one of those, we've had so many productions here, and as you could imagine and may have heard, there's talk about it coming here as well. And we've now had the Yiddish production off Broadway and the several revivals. Actually, Mickey Joe, I wouldn't be in New York if it wasn't for Fiddler. Fiddler was sort of one of the first musicals I ever did. I said I didn't want to do it even. I was quite nervous, but it sort of changed my whole perspective on theater. So who knows? Could you ever have enough Fiddler productions? Who's to say? Who's to say? Okay, so for anyone who doesn't yet follow you and really know your work, how would you describe what you do?
I like to self-identify as a theatre critic who does things as traditionally as any other theatre critic. I just happen to do them in a different place because I create long-form video review content on social media, predominantly on YouTube, but also on podcast platforms. I make little snippets, I put them out in other places across the internet. And in fairness, I think the way that I approach things maybe has a little bit more of a contemporary sensibility as well. But I like to think of what I'm doing as just standard theatre criticism as you've always known it, just in a different format.
Well, I definitely want to talk about your perspective on modern theater criticism and the pros and cons. I think I saw a video of yours that was like, should critics be speaking to previews, so to speak? And I think you're like, yes, I do think that. So I want to get into that. But I actually want to start, and I want to start by talking about just what the theater represents to you. And Mickey Joe, when I first came across your content, part of what you could tell, I'm my own fan, in my own world, because it changed my life when I was 10 or 11 or so, and in some ways saved my life. And I grew up probably very much the U.S. version of you, Broadway flea market every year, carrying door signs from Miss Saigon home to me. Like it was just my world. But for you, what does it represent? Why do you love it so much?
After all this time, I still find it difficult to really put into words why it's such a special thing and why it feels like such a special place in the sense of it that still feels like home. I grew up watching over and over VHS recordings of Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals at my grandmother's house, like Cats and Joseph in the early 2000s. And then
Hey, Mr. Producer was worn out for me.
Yeah. The classics. And then just seeing everything that was close enough to me, and kind of I always kept getting closer and closer and closer to it, because if I look back now, the things that I was gravitating to as a child, I discovered the earliest seasons of The Muppet Show, and I was like, this is interesting, but some of these guests they have on here are interesting as well. And I think that drew me to Bernadette Peters. And then from there, I started to find Sondheim, and I saw Into the Woods done at Regent's Park Open Air Theatre. And it was so different to the recording, the original Broadway one that I'd already watched at that point. And I thought, oh my gosh, two different productions of the same thing can look completely different. And that kind of blew my mind up to, and that's as big as theatre can be. And then I still see things now that continue to expand, like my understanding and my appreciation for what it is. I think it's just this sense of emotional connection and the honesty of it that can speak more profoundly, I think, than almost anything else.
Yes, I love that you said that, because someone once described to me the power of the theater in terms for them. They were trying to get me to it was in a scene. They were like, I want you to act better, but specifically the genuine transference of energy, and that audiences can feel that live. Okay, but let me just be clear. If I in my research when I was digging around, you went to school for mathematics?
I did. I never did drama or theatre academically, because at the earliest possible point to choose that pathway, it would have been to do drama. And at that point, it would have been via acting. And I rejected all of that from the age of about 11 because I went to an all-boys school. And I was a little gay teenager who at 11 didn't want other people to know he was a little gay teenager. And there was something about acting, even though it was pretend, that required a level of honesty that I think I was so repressed and I was so academic and just focusing on that, that I sort of knew instinctively I couldn't do that. I couldn't do drama classes. And so moved away from that at the earliest opportunity. And then went down this academic pathway and was doing, I don't know what I was going to do with a maths degree. I dropped out of university because I discovered the Musical Theatre Society and became the treasurer and then became the president and stopped going to my lectures. And I don't know what economic career I had bound myself for. It's very Leo Bloom and the producers walking away and stop the world, I want to get on. And yeah.
Okay, but so you don't identify as a performer at all?
No, and I've done bits and pieces purely for the joy of it. I've come from a big family of singers. My dad is a professional singer. My sister is a fantastic singer. And I've always enjoyed doing that. I'm not a terrific actor. I've done my share of little Amdram shows, which is community theatre here in the UK, and student productions. I did like the last 5 years at university when I just got out of a 4-year relationship and I was like, this is going to be really helpful. And I do the occasional 24-hour musical still. And I have live shows that I now do once a month, which are just like chat show cabarets. And it's my opportunity to platform performers who I think are really talented and composers and creatives. And I talk to them and I'll sing a silly song at the beginning of that, but it's not to try and furnish my name so I can launch a little career on the back of that as a performer. That's never been an ambition that I've had.
Well, because I remember, I forget, it might have been with who was going to bring their show across. I actually I auditioned to be their standby. What was the show from Edinburgh that was then cancelled?
Oh, My Sons Are Queer, but What Can You Do?
Yes,
Rob Madge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. What, remind me their name?
Rob Madge.
Rob Madge, right. I thought I had seen a video of the two of you, and am I making that up? This could have been a long time ago. Am I totally making that up? Did you sing with them?
We did. So Rob was a guest at one of my shows and sang something with the composer Pippa Cleary, because the two of them co-composed the music in My Sons Are Queer.
Yes.
But if it was Rob and I singing something together, it's because the other guest at that show was Jack Malone, who is now on Broadway in Operation Mincemeat, who was singing the song that Trunchbull sings at the end of Matilda, The Smell of Rebellion, and it has child backing vocals. And Rob had been in Matilda pre-West End in a role that was cut. And so I said, Rob, can you come and sing child backing vocals with me? And so that's what happened.
Okay, amazing. Okay, so then going back to, it sounds like it was in university that maybe you first had the real spark of specifically theater. If that's true, do you remember the moment when you were like, wow, whatever this is that I'm experiencing, I want more of it?
Do you know what it is? I'd never stopped going to see everything from the age of 16. I mean, before that, my family would go and see one West End show a year. And around about 16, I realized that wasn't enough and that I wanted to see everything. And my mother would go with me and I'd take her to the strangest things. I think I took her to see Roadshow, the European premiere of the Sondheim musical Roadshow, and various strange things.
Did you love that nod to it in That and Old Friends, by the way, that little bounce moment?
We didn't have that here. So people have been telling me this. They didn't do that in London. They've added that for New York, and I haven't seen it in New York. And so I might try and go back during the run at some point because I need to know. It was great. Yeah.
I looked at my partner who's not quite where Aaron's at, so he wouldn't necessarily know that bounce. But I was like, that's bounce. Well, bounce then, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was like, it's bounce. No one else was with me, but it was really exciting. So I cut you off. Keep going though.
That's the most brilliant thing. Just turning in the frame and just be like, it's bounce. That's bounce. That's what's happening.
It's bounce.
But no, and I was taking her to all these strange shows, thinking she's going to stop coming with me at some point. And of all things, it was Shrek in the West End was the one where she was like, I think you're old enough to go by yourself now. I was like, I thought you'd love Shrek. How was Shrek the straw that broke the camel's back? But in any case, I'd got a job working 3.5 hours in a library on a Saturday morning. It finished at 1 o'clock. At 1 o'clock, I would run to the train station. I'd made £30 that morning. I would spend that on a train ticket and the matinee of whatever was at the local theatre that was half an hour away by the train. I would go and see that. The thing that I then started doing is writing about all of these shows on a blog that I never published anywhere. If social media existed, I wasn't using it. I was just putting it on the internet and then telling no one. And the thing at university, the reason that that may have been a spark is because I was finally around other people who loved musical theatre. I'd always had the love for it, but it was a sense of community that started then. And it was through performing, because we were doing showcases and we did Jekyll and Hyde, and I played Sir Danvers Carew at 18 and lots of other things that made no sense. But it was just getting to talk to people about, like, have you heard this new thing called Hamilton that just came out? Or playing people the prologue from Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812 before it was on Broadway, and everyone sharing the candy store bootleg from Heather's before it was in the UK. Like, just connecting to other people who loved that thing that you loved as well for whatever inexplicable reason and were as passionate about it. I found community then, and that's what then made it all a lot bigger for me.
So do you remember, and I loved, I was listening to your episode with Catherine, and I was, I forget how you quite described that early blog, but it was something about a way for you to sort of organize your own thoughts. And if I may, Mickey Jo, one of the things that what I really appreciate about that, and I think, I just want to say, gives even more credence to you and your ability to speak to theaters, because that was your practice. In some ways, it was the developing of your form, of your opinion, of your understanding of the craft. And Mike, who co-hosts this podcast with me, we talk about that, how more and more, like with ChatGPT, with all this shit, it's getting harder to sit down and think through thoughts and process, just to lift that up. But then what was the moment that you said, I want to talk about theater online. I want to, there's a community here. I want to start to take an autonomous approach here.
It's the strangest pathway of how I got there, because I'd done Musical Theatre Society at university. I realised that whatever I was doing with math wasn't what I wanted to be doing. I moved back home. I utterly fell into teaching math again, because they found out I had some semblance of a qualification. And I was doing local community theatre, and I loved the backstage Broadway.com videos. And I was like, I'm going to make stuff like that because we're all having so much fun, and this would be a lovely thing for people to look at afterwards. And I was thinking, like, if I make these, then people locally are really going to like them, and they're going to cast me in more shows, because I'm going to like be the version of famous that you are in the world of local community theatre. And then the pandemic started to happen, and that coincided with me just like starting to talk about different things. But I was never reviewing, because it was my foolish understanding at that point, because I didn't want to sit down and watch a 30-minute YouTube video of someone talking about dramaturgy. I didn't think anyone else would either. I thought no one wanted to listen to me. I thought no one wanted to look at my face for 30 minutes. No one wants to hear my voice for 30 minutes, or even like 20 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever my videos used to be before they got much longer. No one wants to listen to a spoken review. And then it wasn't until theatres were reopening after all of the period of closure, and I'd spent all that time trying to make fun theatre content around, like, what are my favourite shows? Which lyrics do I think are silly? And like talking about news and talking about everything that was possibly happening and singing a little bit, whatever I was trying to do. As I lent more into the world of gently reviewing stuff, people responded to it, and I thought, oh, this is a thing that I can do that makes sense. Like, I actually have a perspective here, and I have the ability to articulate myself, and people respond to it, and people engage with it, and people share their thoughts about it. And again, it ought to have been something that occurred to me, because I had been doing it, like you said, for years. I didn't think the space existed for it until I sort of stumbled into that.
And how do you see your role as a theater critic compared to traditional critics? And do you consider yourself part of that lineage, or is this something new?
I would like to think that I am. It's, it changes week on week in terms of how little corners of the industry respond to me and engage with me, because at the start I was just sat in a room talking to myself, and theatres were only just reopening, and I didn't have grand designs on becoming very integrated in the critical ecosystem. And now I would say that I am, to a certain extent, over here and kind of making strides to be in New York, but people have different perspectives on what I do, and whether it can be seen as comparable, whether the fact that it's video, the fact that it's online doesn't matter, or whether it's a huge boundary to ever being taken seriously. I refer to myself as a professional theatre critic on social media, and a lot of people, every single time I say it, that someone will pop up and take issue with it because no one has said to me, here's a qualification, or appointed me to that role. I make an income doing that, and we can talk more about how that works for me. But it's like if you write a book, and if you get the book published, then you're a writer, and that happens. And that's my interpretation of what it is that I do. I reverberate between the ideas of I'm just going to do my thing and stay in my lane and nothing else matters, and then thinking what I do, I am operating the same way. I'm talking to the same PRs, I'm going to the same performances, I am doing the same thing that these other critics are doing. I have a lot of friends who write for newspapers as critics in the UK and a couple in New York as well. And so I change my mind on a daily basis about whether I want to be validated and be among that, or whether I think what I'm doing is different and that's important as well, and whether it's more about empowering everyone to feel like they can have a perspective.
Well, I mean, listen, we live in a moment where having an owned audience, kind of to your point about, why you even started in the first place. Maybe I'll get cast more if there's more people that I have more of an audience paying attention to me. And you've got 75,000 followers on YouTube who are interested in what you have to say. So, what makes a theater critic? I mean, because just to be clear, there are people who could have gotten BFAs and then MFAs and be the best directors and actors in the world, and they could also be shit critics. So to your point of what even, and that's an interesting question. What, in your opinion, what qualification do you need to be a credible, quote unquote, theater critic?
I think it's interesting. I do, and I will say on the back of what you just said, that I don't think many of the critics I know would make half decent performers, myself included. So there's a reasonable separation there. I think I do want to empower everyone to feel as though that it's accessible to them. At the same time, I think there are certain qualities. I think you learn how to see a show in a certain way, and there's a certain amount of objectivity, and separating yourself from, am I having a nice time? I read a lot of reviews and see a lot of perspectives that are just sort of based around reviewing the evening that they had at the theatre. And I think especially over here, there's a lot of shows that are celebrated that are very crowd pleasing and that are very satisfying, but if you dig into it dramaturgically, it's a different kind of a conversation. I'm kind of orbiting around what you asked, really, but I think you have to have a certain amount of understanding of what's going into the thing, of the challenges that there are in putting it together, how all of the different elements are working. You have to take everything into account. You have to look at every aspect of the creative process, and it's the ability to infer from that. Is what I'm seeing a bad performance? Because a performance is a product. A performance is not just an actor. Is it about the direction? Is it something in the other person? Is it something in the scene partner? Is it something in a design choice that is just sort of throwing everything here? Is it a problem with the material? Is it a problem with pacing? And I think it just comes from seeing a lot of stuff, and you get an ear for it and you get an eye for it, and You get a sense of this is what works for this style of show. This is what a comedy needs in this context. This is what this kind of a show needs in this context. I think it's just trying to be the theatre equivalent of as well read as possible.
Well, and well read comes over time. You know, the reason, and here, well, let me answer the question for a second, because I sort of give my perspective and say, here's why I think you actually do represent the next iteration of modern theater criticism, and it's because we know these publications. I mean, Peter Marks, we were talking with Peter about it. He's like, we never. Well, one of the things the Post never could figure out was how to take their commentary and turn it into bite-sized pieces of content for things like TikTok and Instagram that might eventually get people to your longer form. But they couldn't quite figure it out. And the truth is that we are living in a digital age. And happy for you to weigh in on this too. I actually I think the theater has to think about how they do this, and not just from a marketing perspective. I think the theater has to go, how are we making a move online? And I'm not saying shows are all online, but I think what you are doing is actually keeping the theater alive. I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. I really do think that in order for this form to survive, I was watching that Olivier video, and I'll be honest with you, I was like, well, you should be up there. The first part when you're doing your thing sort of from behind, but who, this old stodgy, I'm not saying there's not value to it, but you are the next generation, and your generation, to going back to it, because I know I'm probably considerably older, you found this community. And then not only did you found the community, you built off of it and built your own community around it. And I think we are seeing, with things like these Broadway raves, which are becoming quite interesting, this whole other generation that is being that can carry the theater forward. And I really do believe, both in criticism and in just the form itself, that you are its future. I mean, I'm not trying to be BS. Does any of that resonate with you?
I appreciate, and it's a lot of very lovely things to say, and I agree. Certainly, when it comes to nurturing where the next generation of theatre goers are and bringing them into the conversation, something I've always loved about where I sit on YouTube is, again, back when I was assuming no one was going to listen to 10-minute long review videos and then cut to me talking about Sunset Boulevard for 45 minutes at a time, I also thought I'd only be talking to young people. I was like, it's only young people, teenagers on social media. And I get the most brilliant comments from people who say, well, I saw Carol Channing do Hello, Dolly back in the day. And I get this amazing, and it connects me with so many people, with people of all ages, of all backgrounds, who have the most incredible wealth of theatrical experience as performers, as creatives, as audience members. And so I think for everyone, that is where the conversation seems to be shifting. I love being in New York because you can go to a bar after a show and you can hear people talking about theatre. It's not something that we get a lot of here in London.
And see the people in the show that you just saw.
Also that. Yeah, we were waiting for March 2023, we were waiting for the Bad Cinderella reviews to drop at midnight like it was a presidential election, like all refreshing our phones, being like, the New York Times has been called, I'm calling for the New York Times, and Jonathan Groff is in the next booth over, chatting with a bunch of people. But yeah, that's not something that we do very well in London because it's the city that sleeps, and all the bars and restaurants are closing at 10 p.m. And so everyone just runs for a train home, and you can maybe eavesdrop on the train about the show that people have just seen, but we don't have that sense of community. The theatres are a little bit further apart. It doesn't feel the same way that Midtown Manhattan does. And so to then have an online forum where not only West End theatre fans can find each other, but also you get this brilliant transatlantic communication where everyone's talking about Sunset Boulevard because it started here and then it went there. So we're all exchanging thoughts about it. And also people globally who don't have a thriving theatre district like a Broadway or a West End, but still have found this thing and fallen in love with it. So I think that's a big part of I'm answering a question you didn't ask, but that's a big part of why not only myself, so many content creators, online reviewers, bloggers are now finding platforms.
It's been a long time since I've been back to England. I think I told you I was born in Bournemouth.
Oh yeah,
so,
as was I. Yeah.
Oh, you're from Bournemouth? Oh, that's right. I think
Yeah.
yes. But I mean, it's been a long, long time. But I want to talk about the difference for a second, because I actually heard you saying this. I forget on what video of yours I was watching, about the key differences between. It might have been on your rave review of last 5 years. I'm just kidding. You were talking about how the experience of going to see a show in the West End is different than New York, because it isn't all wrapped up in the bar stuff and the like afterwards. Can you talk more to that? And actually, just the differences between New York and London, now that you are really sort of crossing over, even when you give your reviews, just like we do here in America, everything's more capitalistic. So even Broadway feels like, it's just some can be all about money sometimes. So just talk macro and micro, the big differences in the theater over there and here, and how that informs how you engage with your own content.
Oh, there's so many, and I love that question. And I could talk endlessly about this. There are little trivial details in the differences between the actual theatre-going process that change things a surprising amount. For example, most Broadway houses don't really have much of a, we would say, foyer, a lobby space, meaning that they have to do fight call, they have to do warm-up on the stage, and they only really allow people into the building at half hour, 30 minutes before the curtain, because they don't have anywhere to let all of that audience go if they let them in any earlier. Some theatres are a little bit different, but the majority of Broadway theatres, that's why people don't go in until half an hour before. And then because the bars and restaurants are still open, people will potentially go for dinner afterwards, go for drinks afterwards. So some people arrive very close to curtain, see the show, shorter intermission, go out and then talk about it wherever else. Whereas going to the actual theatre in London is the event in and of itself. People get there much earlier. People go and have a drink at the bar. They go back and have a second drink at the bar, because ours is a drinking culture here in the UK. And we have a slightly longer interval. They have more conversation around the show. And that sort of shifts the mindset a little bit about the act of going to that theatre, because we have these grand lobby spaces, and we open the building, but we don't open the house at the same time. That's one small little detail. To talk about the difference in kind of the industry in London and in New York, I think there is nothing that London excels at more than the play. I mean, historically we have Shakespeare. That is our history. And we have these great playwrights, and we have places like the National Theatre, which promote above all else new writing for plays. They're not really great at promoting musicals. And our critics and our reviews reflect that, because nothing is taken as seriously as the play. And musicals, a lot of the time when they are reviewed, if they don't behave like plays, then they are thought of as these trivial, slightly silly things. And if a musical is completely insincere, then it can be celebrated for that. But if a musical takes itself a little too seriously, sometimes it experiences a little bit of a backlash. Even at something like the Olivier's, the way that the categories are named, you have Best Revival, meaning plays, and Best Revival of a Musical. You have Best Actor and Best Actor in a Musical. That's always been the names for these categories, because play is the default here. And then on Broadway, I think the history is not Shakespeare. The history is vaudeville. And the history,
yes.
Yeah. And so it's this golden age musical theatre, and Rodgers and Hammerstein and Sondheim, and the great musical as we know it, really. I mean, you can talk about music hall and other things that led to that, and Gilbert and Sullivan, but really the musical was birthed in America. So I think in general, musicals are still done better over there, and they're also taken more seriously as well. You can look at a show, something like a Hadestown, and see how it's reviewed on either side of the Atlantic. I think it's taken a little more seriously, understood a little better on Broadway, and they dig into the dramaturgy of it. There's so many shows over here, musicals over here in London, where they are only really reviewed on the basis of their script, and they never talk about the score. The score is sort of discarded, and they're treated like plays, where they talk about the narrative, and they appraise that, and they talk about the book, and they don't dig into the score as a component of the writing quite as much. It annoys the heck out of me.
Interesting.
And I think that is something I like to approach. I think there are differences in the way that I approach things depending on where I see them, because it's like the thing we were saying about Fiddler. You go in with the context of there was another production 5 years ago. Ultimately, it was so brilliant that flew out of my head and it doesn't really matter. But you meet something where it is, and that context of where is it being produced and when is it being produced also matters. There's a production of Electra in the West End. It may have just closed. It opened in February. Brie Larson is in it, and Stockard Channing, and Daniel Fish is directing, who directed Oklahoma. And it's a very bold, artsy take on it that if it was downtown in New York would be a sellout success. And because it's in the commercial West End, and you have legitimately a lot of people going because Stockard Channing was in it and she was Rizzo in Grease, and so they're going to see this Greek tragedy directed by Daniel Fish, and it's which is a recipe for disaster for them, because it's not at all what they're expect. Like, she's not going to sing "There Are Worse Things I Could Do." That's not what's happening on that stage. It's just not being received in the way that it ought to be. So the context of where something is then affects it, and I think the review has to speak to that as well.
Well, something that you just said, that Peter was a longtime friend. I used to run a theater in DC for a long time, and he was really instrumental to me. So I learned a lot about theater criticism from him. And something that you just said, that he said, that is really, I'm going to put a word though that you didn't use, is intent. And you said meeting the production where it's at, meaning what did they intend? What is my understanding of the intention of the writer, the director, the designer, and did they meet that? You know, that's, so whether it's a community Amdram, whether it's a community theater production or West End or off Broadway or whatever, was the intent, successful in a lot of ways? And I think that's actually a really clear marker. So listen, you've built this platform that has reached now tens of thousands over the many years, and there are a lot of people who do this in different ways. I'm about to have my friend Jen Tepper on, who just wrote a book. It's a great book if you haven't read it, Women
I
Writing
love her,
Musicals.
yes.
Okay, so those are my years. Jen and I came up at the same time, but that's her way in, right? So it's a really good book. I really think you'd like it. What makes someone's opinion simply stand out today, or perspective rather than just opinion? What is it that, because I would argue, the reason I've been using Jen as an example, who I call Broadway's living archive, is just what I call Jen Tepper. But you're both sort of swimming in a similar lake, but doing very different things. So what makes one's perspective stand out in 2025, in your opinion?
I think there's something around getting to know an individual and getting to know the work that they respect, but the work that they really resonate with on a personal level. I think of Jen Tepper. I think of her long working relationship with Joe Iconis and the Jonathan Larson history, and you can draw a through line through that very much. And the celebration of flop musicals and the intrigue there and all of that stuff. And so I think I always find it very charming and flattering when people have an accurate expectation of how I'm going to respond to something that isn't just like they liked it and they hope that I do as well. And I think I think it's important to be objective, but also theatre is inherently, and the way that we respond to art is inherently always going to be, to a certain extent, subjective. And I think there's no point in trying to hide from that. I always say to people when they're starting to write reviews that I'm never interested in someone saying this choreography was, all of the same things that you hear, this actor gave 110% and they stayed in character the whole time, and the choreography was energetic and the set design was atmospheric and all of these things. How did you respond to it as an individual? And what is that based on as well? Because we have a lot of career critics who have been doing this for decades, who will see a revival of Noel Coward's Private Lives and say, well, it isn't as good as when Maggie Smith leapt onto the trellis at the National Theatre in the 80s or whatever it may have been. And you see something as a young person and you feel disenfranchised because
so
you're like,
specific. Well, I love it.
I'm probably completely wrong. But you think, I wasn't born then, so I feel incorrect because I thought it was really great. But it's not. Yours is still a valid experience. It's just coming from a different reference point. But there is still tremendous value in the kinship that you find between a production and the thing that it reminds you of, or the place that it takes you to, and the way that you respond to it personally. And I think that's an important element of it as well. I think the ability to marry both ideas, the ability to, like you said, look at a production's own intentions, its ability to articulate those, the ability for it to give you a sense of, I understand what it is that they're trying to do here and how well that's been achieved, and also to respond to it personally and individually.
Well, this is why criticism of any kind is super interesting to me. And to be tangential for a minute, to bring it back to this and to the question, I also think, along with growing an audience, having a point of view is also the moment, especially in the online space. You don't need to just homogenize and become one with the other. You know, what is your point of view? And what's fascinating about that in relation to criticism, specifically theater criticism, is that obviously is going to develop over time, but also people get to know you and then they get to go, oh, I trust Mickey Jo. Listen, when I click, I actually do like Jesse Green. I've really grown to appreciate his writing. When I click on Playbill to see, you know, whatever the reviews are, his is the first one I go to. I've long gone to the New York Times, but I trust him now. But it took me a minute of taking in his content to go, I appreciate what he has to say. I also just want to say, you know, part of what to me you represent and why I think there's actually a lot of power in your word is Mike's dad, his name's Angelo, and a lot of times we'll say, well, and he has nothing to do with the arts, couldn't care about the theater, or even doesn't need to watch White Lotus, doesn't need that mainstream media. So we go, would Angelo like this? In a very basic sense, because we as artists, we can get so caught up in our, you know, and I really like taking the approach of just like almost a capitalistic, you know, is this going to be, to your point, is this something entertaining? And then mixing that with a sense of, here's what my point of view is. All of this to say, where do you see theater criticism going, especially as content continues to shift online?
I think with the online direction of it all, I think theatre criticism moves in, I think, not that I think there's a big problem with this at the moment as much as there has been in the past. I think it moves in a slightly kinder direction because I think the vast majority of the people whose content that I see do it very mindfully, where it's less about criticizing individuals. I said the thing before about when you're criticizing a performance, it's not about an actor, it's about a product of an actor and a director and a dialect coach and an intimacy coordinator and everyone who has brought that performance to the stage. It's not as personal in that way. So the more targeted personal criticism sort of rings false in that sense. I also think that there is increasingly, especially in online spaces, a question of authenticity and a desire for authenticity. That's something that the next generation of theatregoers want to see on stage, want to see reflected in casting and in performances as well. And I think just with the format, I think it shifts with people doing reviews on TikTok, with people getting, I mean, I'm not a great example to this because my videos are longer than if you were to read out a New York Times review. Because I like going to detail and I like context and I like nuance. And I think it's not as simple or as black and white as saying, that's a good show, that's not a good show. I think there's so many layers to the thing that you have to unpack, which is what I try and do. But I think it does shift towards these these kind of more overarching ideas where it's like, this has a book problem, this has an issue here, this may be miscast for this person, and kind of these more diagnostic approaches to it. That's just something I'm seeing. And I go to TikTok whenever people talk about, like, I don't necessarily think what I'm doing is the very future. I think it's a moment. I think at platforms like TikTok, platforms like Instagram are what people are moving towards. Attention spans are going in the direction that they are, and short form seems to be the more prevalent place for video content on the internet. And, you know, it's a more recent platform as well, and it's really great at fostering community. There's not a lot of other people who share the same space that I do on YouTube. There are some, but not as many as engage with each other and riff off of each other and exist in the same ecosystem as there are, like, on TikTok.
Okay, but let's talk briefly about TikTok in relation to this for a second, because we won't mention names. I'm happy to, and I can bleep them out if you want context. But there are people that I'm sure we both know that I actually think are unhelpful in this space. And I want to be clear what I mean, especially in this short form mode. People who, there's one in particular who gives insider tea on all what's supposed to be coming in, what's leaving. And sometimes I watch the videos and listen, this is my community too. I know most of these people. I'm like, that's not true. And they're saying shit that they shouldn't be saying. And it feels like it's clickbaity. And then sometimes similarly, and this kind of goes back to that point about, you know, criticism coming in too early, people who do have audiences sharing big brash opinions or thoughts that feel sometimes misinformed, or maybe sometimes even a bit cruel, to be honest with you. So I'm bringing this up because, do you see the danger of that in the online space at all? And how do you even combat it if we also want to live in a world of not only free speech, but promoting as much dialogue and community around this work as we can?
I do. I think it's the product of early buzz and the kind of conversations that I imagine always happen. People have always gossiped about casting. People have always walked out of early preview performances and said, that was dreadful. They've got so much work to do. They're never going to be able to fix that in time. Those conversations, I think, have always happened. And people are now empowered because of social media to have their voices amplified and share that endlessly. And it then recurs for weeks. It gets taken out of context. And you know, there's no, because content creators work individually. I work individually. I don't have an editor. I don't have anything like that. It doesn't go through a system. They don't have to be fact checked. And so it does require people to be responsible and to engage with the industry responsibly, which I hope is something that is the idea of theatre content creators and theatre critics online is still a very young one. And I think the more the industry positively engages with those individuals, then the better it will be for everyone. There is a lot of irresponsible stuff happening on the internet when people try and scoop out news and say, like, I've heard that this is happening, I've heard this particular piece of casting. They don't really respect that they're undermining a marketing plan that has been months in the making, that is instrumental in selling tickets, that it reduces the impact of that announcement. Less people react to it, less people share it, less new people see it. And you are, silly as it sounds, by deflating the impact that moment is going to have when it is finally announced officially, you are reducing ticket sales. And all so that you can be the person who told everyone first, or so that you can monetize your platform about telling people things, which I think is slightly nefarious. And yeah, we're seeing irresponsible behavior for sure. We're also seeing some brilliant things in uplifting new shows and new writing and stuff that's happening far from Broadway, and individuals as well. And we're seeing talent being discovered, and there's positives and negatives with it for sure.
My friend, you might have even heard about it, which is why I'm bringing this up. My friend Michael ran a theater that I work at sometimes at Michigan, Flint, and he did Godspell in a pool. and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
my friend Shayna, who hadn't really done a ton on TikTok, started posting about it. Next thing you know, it blew up, and this tiny theater in Flint, Michigan, and Michael and this production all of a sudden became a thing. And now, I don't think he'd mind me saying, there's talks about what else the life for Godspell in a Pool could be. It reminds me of having this conversation reminds me of the Broadway World chat boards. It's sort of all that would pop immediately now is able to pick up like wildfire online, but that's the nature for every single industry. Let's pivot to talking a little bit about the building of this online platform, because this is really interesting to me. And the point that you keep bringing up, that this is in its infancy, this whole content creator for theater lovers, so to speak. And that's fascinating, maybe just because I've been in my own bubble for nearly 30 years myself. But first of all, were there models for any of what you've created, or have you really carved your own path?
So I wasn't the first person talking about theatre on YouTube. There were YouTubers like Amy Lovett, like Catherine Steele, before I did what I did, who would make the kind of content that I set out to make at the beginning. I was emulating what they were doing explicitly when I was like, this is what a theatre YouTuber is. And they'll react to a new album that's come out, and they will say like, my 5 favorite things about this show. They weren't reviewers. There were also people, not many of them, who reviewed theatre online. There were a couple called the Breaker Leggers here in the UK who did that prolifically. And yeah, that all existed. So I didn't reinvent the wheel with what I did. I just sort of leaned in and took it in different directions, I guess. And then with new apps and with new voices that have come through, it's really just been this thing that has kindled, and a lot of people just talking about what they are interested in, and that kind of igniting new trends, whether it's people talking through there are a couple of people online who give reports on how many people are standing in rush lines every morning, or talk through the grosses every week, and just kind of engage with whatever side of it they find the most interesting.
Was there a first video that really took off where you were like, oh, this could be a thing?
There are videos that redefined my sense of, that's big, because I used to, if I got 1,000 views on something, I was like, I'm famous, this is amazing. And then it was, this won't surprise anyone, but it was when a musical that was then called Cinderella was happening in London. It went to Broadway, it became Bad Cinderella, but long before the name change happened, it was crazy. I just made this first video about it that I don't think I'd even make now, because I was young and foolish, and I was not ingrained in the industry, and I didn't personally know the PR representatives who worked on the show. I hadn't met the performers who were in the cast. I now know all those people. I've now met those performers. So I don't know if I would make this kind of a video today, but the video I made was, this show is coming to the West End, and I'm not really excited about it, and sort of trying to talk about why. And it was like, the marketing wasn't, it didn't seem particularly interesting to me, and seemed like it was delivering a little bit of a mixed message, and it didn't really resonate with the casting. I would later find out, and later be able to put into words, that was indicative of the show's problems within its material, which this is I find this fascinating. When you see weird marketing, it almost always goes back to a show with an identity crisis. And if they don't know what that is, if the writers don't really know what their show is, if the producers by extension don't know what the show is, then they can't explain that to the marketing team. So you see a show and you think, why the hell is that poster advertising this kind of a show? There are shows on Broadway right now with this exact problem, and it's because the production has an identity crisis. But I started talking about Cinderella as it was then coming to the West End. I then went to review it, and it became a controversial show for its own reasons. And I just kind of ended up getting attached to it. So something would happen, some news would come out about it, and people would tag me all over socials and say, Mickey Jo is running to a camera somewhere right now. And it became this thing where I kept talking about it, and it kept...
And then you had to run to the camera.
I had to run to the camera. And then that was why, for the first time, I had to get on a plane and come to New York, because it was coming to Broadway. And I thought, if I, like, this is the time to go. I thought it was going to be this 2-week trip of a lifetime, the only time I'd ever go to New York. And it's now 2 years later, and I just came back from my 8th trip.
You know, I was in Pittsburgh. This is years ago. I was seeing a My Fair Lady with the 2 pianos, the dual pianos. And it was a tiny little theater, Mickey Jo. And it was a tiny cast in this tennis court style. And in the ensemble was this guy named Jordan Dobson. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, you know, you're great. Because he was great. And I was in New York at the time. And next thing I know, I see he's like, oh, I'm going to audition for a show in New York. And he auditioned, he got the cover for Tony. And then, of course, he went on to do Bad Cinderella. And now he's doing all kinds of interesting things. But just funny how there's, I'm sure you do too. You track people's journeys from smaller to much higher places. I want to talk about audience. But before I do, you said something about knowing these performers now and having these relationships. And because you are not writing for any specific publication per se, these are relationships you're developing. And then you have to go on and talk about, honestly, your feelings about sometimes their work. How does that affect you? You seem like a pretty empathetic, smart, intelligent, funny person who can navigate that. But does that ever come up for you when you see something, even someone you might love and go, well, that was really rough? What is that for you?
And that happens, and people say to me, and it's a minority of performers I would now call friends, but there are some that I really am friends with, but just a lot that I know and I'm on good terms with. They do encourage me. They say, like, be honest. I want to know what you honestly think. And I find the ability to make it less personal, to separate it from the individual, to say that was a performance, I think is helpful. It is difficult. I don't respond the other way either. I get messages from performers saying, I just watched your video. Thank you so much for the kind words about my performance. And more often than not, I leave it unread and I don't respond to it because I don't really know how to. But also, I simultaneously have to reject the idea that what I'm saying is kind, because it's not. It's just my opinion. If I let you tell me that I was being kind, it implies that if I don't like it, it's unkind, which is not what I'm going for. And I wasn't out of generosity that I said those things. They were extraordinarily talented. They were well cast. They were well directed. They were in a good production, opposite good co-stars, everything aligned. We're all lucky. They're lucky and I'm lucky that it all worked out and that I was empowered to say nice things about it. It wouldn't be just their fault if it didn't go that way, and it wouldn't be unkind to say so. So it is a bit of a difficult position. From the perspective of the people who I liaise with to go see the shows, to review the shows, those are the PR representatives who I think have enough clients that they're on to the next and they don't often take it personally. And I don't think I ever, on occasion, I'll twist a knife a little bit, but I'm not really a critic who goes out of their way to say that something's really terrible, unless I think there's something in the ethos of the thing, like this ought not to be taking up the space that it is. There are a couple of productions that, have been fast-tracked to the West End or fast-tracked to Broadway over really talented, hard-working writers who can't break into that kind of a space because they're not as prestigious, they're not as acclaimed. And there are various projects that just never ought to have ended up where they did, and it's only on the back of allegedly great creatives, or whatever. There was something else I was going to say, but I've moved myself away from the point that you asked.
Okay. What have been some of the biggest surprises for you, Mickey Jo, about growing an audience online, both good and bad?
Starting to get recognized in public is always strange because, I'm sat there talking to a camera and, you don't think that that's going to translate into people stopping you in the street. I met Jordan Dobson after post Bad Cinderella, after Hair at Two River Theatre in New Jersey.
Yes.
And we'd been to see it, and I'm doing my usual thing, and I'm talking to a camera, and I'm walking down the street, and he's on the street corner, and he points at me, and I'm like, yeah, and there's a mutual thing which happens on occasionally. But it started to happen a little bit, particularly in theatre spaces, but then we came to New York, and in Midtown Manhattan, everyone's everywhere, and the theatre district and the community is so prevalent. It happens more in New York. I am recognized more on the street in New York, and in fact, I have more people watching my videos now from the US than from the UK, which is its own bizarre little statistic. But on our most recent trip, we went to Smash, jet-lagged, on the first night we arrived. And the usher that we saw going to the building, we'd met before on a previous trip, and she'd come over to introduce herself and say that she likes the videos. And so saw her again, and she said, "Hi, boys, welcome back." We walk through, and two guys stop us before going up the stairs and say, it says, like, "Me and my husband love watching your videos." We have a long chat with them. We go up the stairs, and the usher up there who's scanning our tickets and showing us to our seats is like, "Oh, I manifested that you would come and see this show." Like, it's so
Wow.
bizarre that happens now. So that's been a big surprise, just that people, that it exists, that people are really out there in the real world, because you see a statistic and something like 50,000 was very exciting on YouTube and 75,000 was very exciting on YouTube, and it keeps moving, and the longer that you look at it, it doesn't feel like real people. You can't grasp what 75,000 real people, or a video that's been seen by 200,000 people. There's no way of really appreciating what that is and what that looks like until you're out actually meeting people in the real world.
Have there been any negative effects from living in such an online space where you are sharing your point of view and people can get heated and emotional?
Yeah, I think some people will always form strong reactions to someone sharing their perspective, especially to someone sharing their opinion. I think people, and it goes to the extreme in both directions. There are people who come up to me and say, "I always agree with you. I agree with everything that you have to say." And it always makes me nervous, because I think the day is coming that you won't. And I don't ask anyone to be on board with me for every single review, every single, like, "Yep, that's a 5-star, that's a 3-star," whatever it may be. I think we're never going to be able to see eye to eye consistently, and it's too much pressure for me to try and think that, like, I'm agreeing with, because then you start to worry about, like, is this what people want me to say about this? And that's something that you absolutely can't think about. And then there's the other side of it as well, where the idea that I'm sharing my opinion, and because I'm making a 30-minute video talking about a show and I'm just saying what I thought of it, it comes across, like, of course, very opinionated, and people form, their own version of me from that. And I have to appreciate that that's none of my business, and just kind of separate myself from it. But there's definitely a negative side with it as well.
But clearly you understand, and it's absolutely generational, but this is also, I would argue, your business now. So you understand the online space, and specifically audience engagement to some extent. So how do you approach your audience engagement? Do you read all the comments? And does that ever influence the kind of content that you create?
I think I do, absolutely. I read every single comment, and I'm terrible at, people will say lovely things and I'll just skim through, and I realize after a while what I'm doing is I'm just sort of scanning for problems. And so I don't really absorb the nice things that people say. If someone's sharing an interesting anecdote, then I'll really pay attention to that. But if people are just saying like a compliment, they'll just scan through that, and I'll wait until I get to the negative thing, then I'll fixate on it, and I'll be like, "They don't like my hair? What's happening?" And then just invest far too much of my time and my emotions in that. It's really valuable for anyone who is doing this to engage with those and to find out what it is that people are responding to. In terms of knowing what to talk about and knowing what's going to be a video, it helps to pay attention to all of the other places. It sucks that I don't really have a presence on Twitter anymore, because it just started to feel like I was complicit in the end of the world. And so it sucks not feeling like, and there's nothing that's really arisen to its equal in terms of just a hub for conversation in the same way that's not video based. but it's useful to be in those places and kind of see what is it that people are talking about, what are people intrigued about. And we saw between 10 and 20 shows on our most recent trip to New York. And the first video I made when I got back was about the last 5 years, because that had kind of been dominating conversation, at least in terms of whether or not it was going to be any good. There were other shows that people were really intrigued by, but there was more of a consensus of everyone is saying great things about this. And so I think that was the one. And Smash is another one, because there's so much curiosity about, like, is it anything like the show, and is it good? And it's divided opinions in many ways. So that's probably the next one that I'll be working on. But
okay, well, I promise you, this is going to come out. I don't think this comes out literally till June, so I'm sure your video will come out. So I'm just curious, what was your? I haven't seen it at all. I don't know much. Did you like it?
I initially thought it was disappointing. It's a weird one. It has a lot of entertainment factor, because it'll make you smile and it'll make you laugh, and the songs are good. It will teach musical theatre people what it's like to be a non-musical theatre person seeing a jukebox musical, because we're going to Smash because we like those songs. Those songs, the way that they're done in Smash, mean nothing, because 99% of the show, they're just performing these numbers in rehearsal or in the show, and it doesn't connect to anything emotionally. There is one song in the second act that Caroline Bowman sings when she actually has some meaning behind it, and then you go, oh yeah, this is musical theatre. I understand why it's moved so far away from the TV show. At the same time, it's got a lot of issues, but that was the first show we saw. And then we saw a bunch more shows on this most recent trip, and Smash started to look real good in the rearview mirror, because we saw a lot of other car crashes driving down the highway, which I kind of knew was coming. This was a weird one with my parents, where they said, oh, you're going to New York again? And I was like, oh, yes. And this was like the day before, because I'd forgot to tell them, because we go so often now. And they said, what are you excited for? What show are you most looking forward to see? And I was like, I know that the ones that are going to be the most successful for me professionally are the ones that I'm anticipating being quite bad. And so it was kind of, just because of the timings and because of the things I had lined up at that point, it was going with the knowledge that things had either already been reviewed, or the buzz coming out of previews was not great, which was an interesting mindset to be going in. And that was mostly the musicals. We saw some really terrific plays alongside, I should say.
For most people today, this is not just for you as a content creator. The world of content creation and the online landscape, to my point about theater needing, in my opinion, to really consider what this move online looks like, even engaging more of people like you as part of the process, which is a whole other conversation. This is practically a full-time job unto itself, content creation. To your point about Aaron saying, listen, we got to get it, I'm just going to do it, whatever. So you're primarily on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, to your point about no longer being on Twitter. Yeah. So in a moment when we've got Blue Sky and isn't Thutter, there's a new one I just heard about, in this moment where this is going to be a constantly evolving landscape. How did you pick and have the boundaries and discipline to say I'm focusing on these, and how do you use each of them differently?
I think YouTube has always been and will always be home because of the nature of the content that I like to make, because I like to explore the nuance of things. I like to really come at things from every angle and go into detail and take my time. And so it's always going to be 10 minute plus. I'm always rambling on about something and saying all the things which I think are important to say. And I like spaces like TikTok and Instagram for doing something slightly different. YouTube is beneficial to me professionally because it's monetized. And my experience with YouTube monetization and TikTok monetization is that YouTube is much more consistent and much more beneficial for the creator. TikTok has a sort of a wild history of taking down a lot of successful content under the guise of copyright that's very difficult to argue, that's very difficult to contend with, that's not particularly user-friendly for creators. You're sort of beholden to them, and it is suspiciously often that it's well-performing videos and well-paying videos that are taken down. It's a tiny little supplement for me. I don't really make money from TikTok, nor do I really try to. YouTube has been a consistent source of that for me since 2022, like mid 2022, I think. And then the start of 2023 is when I went full time with that. And then now I have the thing that because I'm professional on social media, every new social media platform that is introduced, if it seems like it's going to be a big thing, then I feel like it's important to be an early adopter. Threads was coming, and I was like, oh, I've got to be one of the first people to be on Threads, and I've got to start posting on Threads. And then it kind of died down a little bit, and the same thing happened with Blue Sky, because I regret not doing it earlier with TikTok. Everyone was posting on TikTok, and I didn't understand it for the longest time, and I didn't participate. And then I wished that I had, because I felt like I still feel like that with TikTok, really, where everyone already has this sense of community, and I will go on there occasionally if I don't feel like sitting down in front of a camera and talking for 30 minutes. If I just want to kind of throw a grenade into a conversation, I'll go and just say something on TikTok for a minute and a half. But I don't necessarily feel like I'm participating in a community the same way that I see other people doing. I like watching stuff on TikTok, and I like seeing how they all engage with each other. I don't feel like I'm a part of that.
So you don't repurpose all of your content?
When I have the time, and time is a huge thing, because I'm in a period at the moment where I make almost daily content, and it's anywhere between 20 and 45-minute videos. If it's vlogs, it's longer. I film all of them. I edit all of them. I edit myself in double speed to try and get through it faster. So much of my day is just spent emailing and organizing. I'm at the theatre 5 nights a week, usually.
Wow.
If I'm here in the UK. If it's traveling, then we're traveling. Obviously, New York happens a lot, but we've started becoming more and more enamored with going to see stuff in Germany, in Paris. There's like every time we go to a new place, we become aware of the things that are happening there. There's regional US stuff that we'd love to go and see. So it's all just sort of accelerating. And if I have an extra 10 minutes in my day, I'll go, oh, I should take that clip from that video and go and post it on Instagram and go and post it on TikTok if I have the time. But time is a thing that does not come often to me when I'm doing what I'm doing.
Of course. And of course, I mean, it's like you said, it's a full-time job now. Have you thought about bringing on people to support you?
I know myself, and I know that I am too much of a perfectionist, and I would be the most, like, if I got the world's best video editor, I would still be like, did you put that bit? Did you put that bit? And, oh, I see that you did that. I would actually like take that out and do that, and like just do this bit. And so I would be a nightmare, because I've only ever been doing my own stuff, and I've gotten too used to that. There may be a beautiful day in the future where I have a whole team of people and it starts to look like the online version of a news channel, and I'm like, here's Ellie with the weather, and it's someone talking about the theatre news from the week and doing all these different things, kind of like what an online outlet does, what a Playbill does, what a Theatre Mania does, what a Broadway.com does, with approaching the news and the industry from these different areas. And like, we cut to someone on the street, and I would love to have a presence at every single opening night at every single opening night where there's a red carpet, and be able to review everything. There's a lot of blogger reviewers in the UK who have teams of people, but again, it goes back to me kind of, because it's MickeyJoTheatre is not a brand, it's me as an individual. So I don't feel like I can bring on an extra person to go and cover the stuff that I can't, because it's my perspective that I'm taking to things. When you read the New York Times or somewhere like that, when you read any magazine, you occasionally get a consistency of writer, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. You're reading the magazine's review of it. It's not always attached to a consistent individual.
Is that something you would ever be interested in? You know, does MickeyJoTheatre become MJT? And that's some sort of, you know, theatrical outlet that a digital theatrical outlet at that could expand and include other offerings and other people. Is that interesting to you? I'm just curious.
I would be interested in it. I would like to get to the point where I feel like that's something that's possible and I feel more comfortable with it. I would definitely sleep more. I would definitely have real weekends. I would get to be up to date with the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Like, these are things that would be available to me. But at the moment, it's trying to figure out how to work smarter, not harder, with everything I already do, and how to bring in all of these other avenues as well, and collaborate with shows in different ways, and kind of take the stuff that we've learned in the US, because they engage with theatre influencers in a very different way, in a way that involves marketing teams, in a way that promotes every individual little aspect. Like, the box office is opening today, that'll be an activation. The cast recording is coming out, that'll be an activation. And they use theatre influencers. Broadway is getting very quickly much better at using theatre influencers to promote that, to celebrate that, and create excitement around it. That's not happening in the UK at the moment, so we're trying to bring that across. But over in the UK, I actually get treated more like a legitimate theatre critic, which is the kind of energy I'm trying to bring to New York. So it's about marrying the two and trying to just keep running at the same pace on the treadmill, or I've been burned out for years and it will take me slowing down to realize that. But
well, I think people don't understand the monetization game when it comes to content, about how much work it is. I don't, and I think I would argue that I think people look at it and go, that's the kind of job I want. That's nice and easy. But do you agree with that? And what are other things that people might not understand about making money from digital content?
I mean, I think because I just do it relentlessly, I can sort of always rest on the comfort that I'm putting out enough videos and just something is going to hit. And I separate it from myself a little bit, where it's not my responsibility to make the theatre world interesting. I'm just desperately hoping every day that a production is buzzy enough, and I'll be given the gift of something like a Sunset Boulevard that everyone wants to talk about, that creates conversation, or even something controversial. You don't want bad things to happen to individuals in the industry, but realistically, as and when a little bit of controversy does happen, it's usually a prosperous day for me and for everyone else on the internet, and for people writing for What's on Stage and for Broadway.com to go out there and talk about it. In terms of what people don't know about monetized digital media, I think people either think no one's making any money, like it's really tiny money, or people think that people are getting extraordinarily wealthy. And it's really just a pretty traditional amount of money. I make a little bit more than my full-time teaching salary used to be, but not much. It's kind of just, my life hasn't suddenly become more glamorous. I think people think that because I travel a lot, but I just don't save money is the thing. I just make money and I spend it all on theatre, which is all that I used to do anyway. So life is really just the same.
Are you finding that press teams, producers, I'm assuming in the UK, are like, saying, here's your tickets, please come? I could be wrong. But are you experiencing that? And what about in New York? Are people giving you tickets now?
Yeah, in the UK, definitely, with, again, like 95% of the time. And there's still a little bit of resistance to the concept of online in only literally like 2 or 3 theatres and their representatives. But there's a lot of people that champion me and have done for a long time. And it is PRs and it's producers and it's creatives. And so I do feel very part of the conversation involved in the industry here. The Olivier Awards, because you mentioned it earlier, are a little thing where I think that's going to be the last door that I walk through. That's the last hurdle I'm ever going to get over, simply because it's the one day of the year where the theatre industry is suddenly interesting to all of these other outlets who 364 days of the year don't care about what's happening in the West End unless a big celebrity is doing something, and suddenly on the day of the Olivier Awards, then they're able to court the attention of all of these big names. Does it turn into compelling carpet coverage that you actually see on social media? Not necessarily, but that's their prerogative. When it comes to New York, there have been a couple of critics, a couple of creatives who have sort of opened doors for me by saying my name to producers, to press representatives. And so, like, ground is being broken there. There are other times when I start the conversation, and because it's YouTube, they refer me to social media, they refer me to marketing, who are more than happy to have a conversation with me. And those are teams that don't really exist over in the UK. There are people who now work in influencer marketing explicitly on Broadway. The work that Catherine Quinn is doing for a handful of shows is all quite new, and they're very happy to have me in the conversation because they understand the value and they see the size of my audience and what it is that I'm doing, and so they're happy to bring me into it.
Well, because I was watching the live stream of the Olivier's red carpet, and then the performance. I wanted to see what Raphael too, because I knew he was performing. But then I was watching your video, and you know the stark difference for me, just to say, in this moment when we talk about a moment of authenticity, was watching you and Aaron watch the ceremony and react, and you're contagious because it's you know, I was laughing when Imelda won, and you're like, yes, of course. You know, like you're having a real time, and that great shot of you two from behind that you included, and I say this because it's such just much more interesting coverage, right? Like, and that's why when I was first watching, I'm like, well, you should be up there because you probably would do more for those shows having you up front and center, but they'll get there. Listen, as all these old heads go away, you know, people will understand the value. Only a couple more questions. You've been so generous with your time, and obviously I'm nerdy about all this. Just briefly talk though about, if you don't mind, about the income streams, because I think this is an interesting conversation about creative sustainability. You obviously ads through YouTube and just the monetization there. I think you have a subscription channel on YouTube. It's right.
Yes. Which is it's a little nominal little thing because I toyed with the idea of like making regular content and then making content for members separately. And almost everything I want to say, I want to be able to say to everybody. And there's not like, what can I do in my world in the theatre? There's not entire reviews I want to put behind a paywall as exclusive, because that's not fair to those productions. That's not fair to those performers, or like any kind of piece of theatre news. So it's not, my content isn't geared well towards making exclusive member content. So it's a little nominal, like, if you want to subscribe to this and get early access to things, fantastic. Thank you for your support. But I'm not creating a lot of extra special stuff.
So then besides that, but I think I saw you selling merch.
Yeah. That's been a recent thing. So that's in conjunction with starting to do the live shows, which would be another revenue channel as well.
Got it. And so, and then are there any brand partnerships or not really yet?
And here and there, little things. And I've advertised for stuff before, and something happens when you make YouTube videos, and when a video does particularly well, or a couple of videos in a row do particularly well, you get emails coming in saying, do you want to promote Skillshare, and do you want to promote this like home food brand and this milk that's really nutritious? And I did some of that in the early days because you're making money on the internet and you're like, yeah, I'll talk about this thing that I've tried and seems to be good. And you get to a point where you just want to be able to, people are coming to me to listen to me talk about theatre. They don't want to hear me talk about anything else. And so if you're promoting anything, you want it to be relevant to that audience. And so it's about finding ways to work with the industry, because the theatre industry is not one that has a lot of money to throw at influencers. I always talk about this with other people who are content creators, and we'll say, if we were in the fashion industry, in the travel industry, that's a much more profitable one to be in. No one is being a theatre influencer to make an extraordinary amount of money. Everyone is doing it because they love the theatre. And it's an interesting one because shows never have any money. I hear this from all sorts of people working on them in all sorts of capacities. I hear this from photographers who get told after working on a show that they can't be given tickets to go and see the show because, like, oh, I'm sorry, we have no money. We just don't have any room in the budget for that. And investors are making money and the producers are making money. It just doesn't move in all the right directions. But that's a bigger conversation that we could get into.
Okay, last question, or last question and a half. What would be your dream production of insert revival, new show here, made up of this creative team, starring whomever? What would be your absolute dream?
Oh my gosh. I think it's going to be a Sondheim. It's going to be some sort of a Sondheim. And ask me on a different day of the week, and I get hungry for something different. I think right now I'd love to see a really good Assassins. I think, phrasing it delicately, I think we're in an interesting place politically where that could really resonate. And I think, there's so many delicious options. I'm constantly surprised and delighted by combinations of shows and creatives and directors that I hadn't thought of, and sometimes it's a dream and sometimes it's a misfire, but I will always appreciate a big swing. Jamie Lloyd doing Sunset, not to mention Sunset Boulevard again, but Jamie Lloyd doing Sunset Boulevard was a shocking announcement that I think paid off in a really big way. And it'll be very easy. There's a lot of shows I would like to see get the Jamie Lloyd treatment. There's a lot of other shows that I would like to be kept a million miles away. He did a great version of Assassins at the Mini A Chocolate Factory back when he believed in colour and puppets and confetti and all these things. Some of which he's starting to do again, some of which he was just doing in Much Ado About Nothing as the colour is coming back. But there's so many things. It's on a case by case. If you ask me who I wanted to do the next A Little Night Music, who did I want to do the next Ragtime, then I would have ideas on the kind of voices that we would need to tell those stories. I do think, just in general, and this speaks to a couple of the shows on Broadway right now, there are a lot of female-driven musicals that haven't traditionally been staged on our largest stages on Broadway by female directors. And that's something that I would like to see a little bit more of.
We end every episode. This is my slightly unfair question because it's a broad question. We end every episode with the comfort food performance, a performance we love that we can come back to time and time again. That can mean a lot of. For me, it just means a favorite performance. For Mike, it's something like, something that he'd literally watch over and over again. And I'll kick off as an example, somewhat in honor of our conversation. I was howling during Kate Jennings Grant's version of The Boy From. I love that song, and I've seen it many times, and I was screaming. I was embarrassed because no one else was laughing nearly as hard as I was. But Kate Jennings Grant and The Boy From, I would love to watch her do it again and again and again. So that's my comfort food performance. What would be one for you?
The very first one that came into my head was Joanna Gleason as the baker's wife in the original Into the Woods. I think every single thing about it is absolutely perfect. I just got to see her on stage for the first time in We Had a World over at City Centre, and I had to really focus to engage with the play and not just stare at her in awe the entire time. But alongside that, anything that Bernadette Peters does on stage, I think she has always been my almighty. When she was announced, I'd just found out about Sondheim and everything. When she was announced for Follies at the Kennedy Center back in 2011,
a long
back
time
in the
ago,
day,
yep.
I had like a jar of coins on my shelf. I picked it up, I went downstairs, I poured it out, I counted it with my parents, and I was like, is this enough for me to fly by myself to Washington, D.C. to go and see Bernadette Peters in Follies? Because I don't know how many other like big Sondheim, how many other roles she was going to do at that point. And they pointed out to me that I was 15 and that wasn't going to happen. And that I probably had like £17 in the jar, and I was devastated about it. And then it was Old Friends when I got to see her on stage for the first time, and she sang Losing My Mind from Follies that I never got to see her do when I was 15. There's like 13, 14 years later, and I sobbed because it just meant so much to me to finally get to experience that. But everything she does is just delightful to me. They were doing press for Old Friends the other day, and they were asking them all, how many Sondheim shows can you name in 5 seconds? And everyone's panicking and trying to, because 5 seconds is a really short time, and they're all going like, the frogs. And Bernadette, because she's Bernadette, is still speaking at the same speed, and they're counting down 5 seconds, and she's like, merrily we roll along, and Sunday in the park with joy. It's so charming, and there's no one like her. And with Joanna Gleason as well, it harkens back to a time of real individual performers that had their own voices and had their own styles and were funny and romantic and glamorous and ridiculous and all of those things.
Well, I mean, no shit. By the way, this makes sense. This is tracking. Mickey Jo, I found you. We're both born from Bournemouth. Under the bottom left there is the 98 revival of Annie Get Your Gun, which was my first Broadway musical and my partner's first Broadway musical, where I fell in love with Bernadette. But to your point about what she does something different, just to say, I really loved Old Friends for many reasons. But really, Bonnie and Gavin and Bernadette are doing different things up there. And that's very interesting to me, because everything's coming up roses. Okay. Bernadette singing I'm Losing My Mind or Sending the Clowns, that's a whole different experience. And it's just a different sensibilities. Did Gavin sing Could I Leave You in England? Okay. I mean, because that was amazing. I mean, it was so good. Anyway. Mickey Jo, where can people find you? We'll put it in the show notes too, but where are we sending people to?
Oh my gosh, you can find me over on YouTube. That's my house. That's where I live, at MickeyJoTheatre. You can find me at the same handle across the internet. I am on Instagram. I am on TikTok. I'm occasionally saying things on Threads and Blue Sky. By the time you're watching this, maybe Twitter is fixed. Maybe the world is looking happy. Who knows what's going on? You can find me on LinkedIn for business inquiries. You can find me periodically on the street in the West End or Midtown Manhattan, at a theatre somewhere. Stop me, say hello. And you can find me once a month at I should plug this as well, I'm at the Phoenix Arts Club in London, where I have a semi-regular cabaret chat show talking to rising star performers, brilliant talents, and platforming new British musical theatre writers, having their songs performed. And it's in London, but it's also live streamed internationally around the world once a month on a Sunday evening. It's a Sunday afternoon if you're in America. And you can get tickets for that at the Phoenix Arts Club website.
Period. Thank you, Mickey Jo.
Thank you. Thank you so much.